beautiful bookish people. My name is Hannah, and today is a very exciting day because we're talking about all the best books we've read in 2020. We're talking about the characters that have made an impression in our mind, the settings we can't get out of our brain. That's right, we're talking about the best books of 2020.
Yep, that's me.
That's right, guys. We're talking about the 2020 Goodreads Challenge, which we won. And we're just giving you the top 10 books of 2020. All that being said, I find it really fascinating to just go back and look at all the books we've read, and us as a collective, we've read them all together, right? And look back on Goodreads and see what books have made an impression, because, like, in my opinion, the best books are the ones we can't get out of our mind. Why did I want to go Selena Gomez? Can't keep my hands to myself.
I mean, I could, but why would I want to?
Because a 5-star can be a great book, but am I thinking about it in 6 months? That's the test. So all of these books I've either thought about a lot, or in my opinion, they're either incredibly good that I need to share them with y'all. Right now, we have a top 10 list and 2 honorable mentions. So we're going to go from 11 to the first spot, the one that's living rent-free up in here that I'm always thinking about. But we're going to start with 11, the 2 honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut, but are still solid books or graphic novels. So the 2 honorable mentions are Ghostworld and Ghostland. Did not do that on purpose, but I am glad it's here. So Ghostworld is just talking about this girl trying to figure out what to do after high school. You know how friendships can kind of shift. In high school, it's kind of like this microcosm and everything feels so intense, but also life changes because a new chapter is open, and so people change, aspects of your life change, and it's all about what are you going to do, figuring yourself out. There's so many little discussions that I loved in this little graphic novel because the reading experience is not that fun. But I loved what it made me think about afterwards. All these like little implications of like a ghost world and this feeling of isolation after somebody moves on without you, or feeling like a ghost in your town that you've known all your life, that what are you gonna do afterward? It had me questioning, it had me thinking, it made me put on my little philosophy hat. So moving on to Ghostland, this is just basically a non-fiction book about demystifying all the famous ghost stories that are most well known. So it talks about famous haunted houses, transcendentalism, and his observations of different movements of supernatural in America. And I found it fascinating. I loved finding out all the different stories behind the famous ghost stories that we're all pretty familiar with. There's some I didn't know about. I loved the exploration of why do humans find ghosts so interesting, and it's always usually an element of longing or desire. There's always something more to ghosts. Ghosts are always a metaphor for something, and that is so cool to me. So to wrap up the honorable mention side, I love ghosts as a metaphor, actual ghosts, and the theme of isolation. So coming in at number 10 is actually The Last True Poets of the Sea. Now I am very biased because I love Shakespeare, and The Last True Poets of the Sea is a Twelfth Night retelling. Arguably one of the best Shakespeare plays, but I think it gave us all, the theater geeks, what we really wanted. A love story between Viola and Olivia, and it did exactly that. It talks about the impact of theater. It talks about daddy issues, god complexes, family relations, the discussion of like what it means to be a family versus a found family. There's growth, there's analysis, all wrapped within a Shakespeare retelling. I could not ask for more, and I have been thinking about it a lot. I do want to reread it. So coming in at number 9 is going to be Pet Sematary. I have been dipping my toes into the horror genre this year, and Pet Sematary was really the good kush.
Dad, look, it's the good kush. This is the dollar store. How good can it be?
I think it was just a tad too long, but I always have this problem with King, is that he loves to explain his metaphor just a little too much, where it's like, we get it, it's an allegory for grief, which I can't come at him because I am a sucker for any allegory for grief. Pet Sematary is basically about this family who recently moved to a new house, and lo and behold, there's a pet cemetery behind the house that if you bury anything in it, they will come back to life. I think King has a really good balance of like storytelling elements that keep the plot moving while also allowing you to think and ponder what you believe about the situation. Moral of the story, don't try to play God. If we've learned anything from Frankenstein, don't try to bring people back to life, man. Moving on. Coming in at the number 8 spot, we have A Darker Shade of Magic. I think this might be Schwab's best work. Now, I have not read Addie, but A Darker Shade of Magic is just a fun, jaunty fantasy. And here's my thing, guys. I'm a little burned out on fantasy, so the fact that I really enjoy this is saying something about Schwab. So it's very hard for me to get into fantasy, but Schwab just has this very easy writing style, and it's stuff you're familiar with, so you're not going to be surprised, but it is well executed. And I'm always going to be in favor of well executed tropes that we've seen before versus sloppy ones that we haven't. And I think that's Schwab's strong suit, is just doing what we're familiar with well. So for me, it kind of felt like a comfort food. It felt like a good old, chicken fried steak. It's not going to taste anything different, but do I enjoy eating it? Of course! It's chicken fried steak from Luby's, guys. It's a good time. Moving on to my number 7th spot, we're going to be talking about My Dark Vanessa. My Dark Vanessa surprised me with how much I enjoyed it. My Dark Vanessa basically, I almost want to call it a Lolita retelling, but it gives the power to the victim, which I think Lolita should have done to begin with. Like, the author of Lolita has admitted that he wants you to feel sorry for the pedophile, but in My Dark Vanessa, that is the farthest thing from the author's intention. She's like, no, he's not a good guy, but instead of making you sympathize with a pedophile like Lolita does, she makes you analyze and understand people's different journeys with trauma, because not everyone is going to think they went through trauma right after an incident. In fact, for Vanessa, her journey is very slow and methodical, and you're going back and forth between timelines, and you as the reader understand, like, this is bad, inappropriate, but you also understand why Vanessa wouldn't think so, because she feels safe and secure in this relation. Kind of modernizes Lolita and kind of takes away all the problems that I had with the original novel. Modernizes it, talks about trauma incredibly well, and also puts it in the Me Too movement, which I thought was really well done. And so I'm gonna tell you, do not read Lolita, read My Dark Vanessa instead. So the next book I want to talk about is Cracked Up to Be, number 6. I think I read Cracked Up to Be at just the perfect time because it follows this girl named Parker, and Parker at the beginning of the year is this like perfectionist, honor roll cheerleader, like the embodiment of the perfect student, and something happens and suddenly her entire personality shifts. And it kind of follows her as she's kind of seeing the world for the first time with new eyes, and she's no longer an optimist but a pessimist. I have to have trigger warnings for rape. I think 2020 has made a dent on all of us, but this year was for the first time I felt like myself going from an optimist to a little bit of a pessimist. I liked Parker as a protagonist because I feel like we typically can tend to have like the happy-go-lucky protagonist, the things that are always going to turn out right, but like for Parker, that's not necessarily the case because she's seen the world as ugly, and I don't know, I think I read this book at the right time because it very much validated my feelings during the time. And you know, sometimes you just can't be happy all of the time. Sometimes you have to sit with your emotion and analyze, why are you down? And that's okay. And so I think reading this book made me validate, it made me be able to validate my own feelings about situations. And so for that reason, I am thinking about it a lot. It's a very short but very impactful book that I enjoyed quite a bit for personal reasons, and I think it is pretty good. So, all right, guys, we are halfway through the list. In the next book, number 5, I'm going to talk about a graphic novel again, which is Injection. Injection follows this group of 5 geniuses as they seek to better the world with an injection. And so what happens is the project kind of fails, but it ends up causing more harm than good. So it's a graphic novel that follows the team getting back together. We're getting the band back together.
Dude, we're getting the band back together.
To try to fix the problems that they cause. There's this really cool line between fantasy and technology. There's a lot of political discussions and how bureaucratic actions can damage certain projects. I think it is a little confusing in the first half, but once you get the terminology down, it is so good, you guys. Honest to God, I think this is the best graphic novel I've read ever. And that's including Saga. Because it's able to like tiptoe the line of like, it's still fantasy and there's these worlds that we're discovering, but it also is very much based in reality. It's just that, in my opinion, like that perfect blend of like, you're able to step away because you're like, oh, magic doesn't exist, but we're still able to have these really cool and interesting discussions about real life problems and politics and bureaucratic actions. Whoa! Which is amazing. So yes, I would highly recommend anybody pick up Injection because it's really good. In my opinion. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. But I love it. Alright, coming in at number 4, we have In the Dream House. Guys, this book. Guys, when I talk about amazing writing, when I talk about reinventing the form of a memoir, when I talk about the discussion of loneliness and gaslighting and manipulation, all of these things are done brilliantly in The Dream House. In the Dream House is basically a metaphor for this toxic relationship that the author went through. It's like basically a vignette style of writing that gives you glimpses into this dynamic and relationship, and none of it is very good. It talks about privilege and alienation and gaslighting and loneliness in almost like bite-sized pieces that isn't overwhelming you. It's so well written and thought through. It's reinventing the mold of what we know for memoirs. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about this book or have seen other reviews talking about it. I just want to add to the echo chamber that I agree. Everyone should read this book. Anywho, moving on. I want to talk to you about Holes, which is in my number 3 spot. I recently reread Holes. I know I'm a little bit cheating because it is a reread, but it's been like 10 years, so we're counting it because it was basically like a new book to me. And I think Holes is the great equalizer of books. I think it's the perfect required reading that allows students to enjoy a story while also adding their own nuances, and also discusses a pretty important topic about the abuse of a prison system. It's so well done. When I talk about like a well put together middle grade, I'm always going to be comparing it to Holes. Every chapter, no matter what it talks about, is important, and it adds something to either the character, the setting, or the plot, which is so rare. I might go out on a limb here and say Holes is the best middle grade book, and that's putting it above Percy Jackson, which is saying something. I kind of want to do a full-blown video talking about why I think Holes is the best middle grade book. I just have to think about it, what I want to say, because it somehow never loses your attention while also discussing important things. It's incredible. I think we need to bring the conversation back to Holes and talk about how good it is, because reading it as a 23-year-old still blew me away, and that is impressive. Ladies and gents and non-binaries, that is impressive. But moving on to my second favorite book of the year, this one has to go to Normal People. Okay, if you don't know, I'm a very much character-based reader because I think humans are so complex that we can talk about so many things when we just talk about humans. And Normal People is a perfect example of my favorite type of character study, because we're talking about wealth and privilege and human interaction changing over time. It basically follows these two characters, Marianne and Connell, and they grew up in the same small Irish town, and they start a secret relationship because Connell is kind of the popular guy and Marianne is the shy introvert that kind of no one talks to. And so they begin this friends with benefits type of relationship, and they get to know each other better, and they start actually falling for each other, because if friends with benefits has taught us nothing in the media, you get attached. And you see like the power dynamic change when they go to college, and then suddenly Marianne becomes the more popular one because of her background and privilege and wealth. I think what is great about Normal People is you can really see the self-motivating factor of humans, because at the end of the day, people are going to do things that they think will benefit them as an individual. We all have our own reasonings, we all have our own executions for different actions, and I think Normal People covers that really well, because it makes sense. Because it makes sense why these characters don't communicate well, knowing their background and how they were raised. So I will say, if you are not a fan of miscommunication, would not pick this book up. If it frustrates you to hell and back, Normal People is not for you. But if you like the conversation of why people can't communicate, yes, Normal People is your book, and it does it so well. So that leads us to the #1 spot. I think I'm going to surprise a lot of you because you probably have not heard of this book. That's why I'm putting it here, because we want to talk about it, because it's so great that I need more people to talk about it, which is Places No One Knows by Brenda Jovanoff. Guys, this book is the reason I read YA. It does everything I want a YA book to do. When people ask me why do I keep reading YA, it's to find books like this that talk about teenage unapologetics, the reasonings, politics of high school, discovering who you are and what you want to be, understanding yourself, reasonings, what you like, what you don't like, trying to answer the big questions for the first time. That's why I read YA, and this book covers it so well. I will say, if you are a fan of like Maggie Stiefvater-esque writing style, Brenda Jovanoff is for you. Let me tell you, the writing style of Places No One Knows is like my favorite type of poetry, because while you might not have gone through the same experiences as our main protagonist, you're still able to understand it because of the specifics that Brenda Jovanoff talks about in this book. So what I mean is, like, Waverly, our main protagonist, has insomnia, and while I don't think I have insomnia, I 100% have not been able to sleep at night, and the words that Brenda Jovanoff chooses makes me feel as if I was going through that experience as well. Okay, I don't think I've even told you what this book is about. So this is about our main protagonist named Waverly, who has insomnia, is not able to sleep all that well, and then one night happens to walk into the dream of someone else named Marshall. I know that might sound incredibly cheesy, that someone just walks into their dreams and they're having beautiful conversations. But trust me, it's done so well, because I think this book is supposed to feel like a fever dream. You're not supposed to be able to tell what time it is, because we're always in this kind of hazy mindset, this kind of trippy setting, because we're debating if it's reality or actual fantasy. And I know that is not going to be for everyone. It's a mixture between incredibly well-crafted writing, well done character development, and this kind of like trippy setting mixed with the unapologetics of teenagers. I don't know if I should say it, but I might say it. I think this is the best YA book I've read in a long time, and so it has to be. It has to be my favorite book of 2020. And so honestly, that is the list. I don't know what else to say to you except please read Places No One Knows. It's incredibly underrated. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Keep reading and all that jazz. Transcendentalism. I got an email from my college. They probably want money. And our main protagonists, ooh, phone call. Can you guys hear that plane? I'll wait for a second. Character adds something to the model. What? It's the best day of the year!